see you guys in the dark.
I've lived most of my life way out in the valley countryside of Ontario. Given, that's not a whole lot for an 18-year-old, but for me, it's the only place that I can call home, and I like to think that I know the entire area, like the back of my hand at least. Adventures across the long, crossing roads, pastures, and woods that made up the skeleton of my village were a common venture in my childhood. As a young kid, I had a habit of biking extremely far out in hopes of finding new places, and sometimes my dad or one of my friends' parents would toss out bikes in their backyard and take us way out to the back road and let us explore for a few hours. This was how a lot of us first found that one of these crappy gravel surroundings by thin woods was a worn-down old shack, sitting there about 20 meters off the path. Honestly, I never thought anything of it, except for the fact that it was creepy. It had no windows to see inside, and I never went anywhere near it. But one of my friends at the time said that her older sister had tried to go in, and that the door was completely locked. We all had better things to be curious about at the time than that anyways, so I quickly moved on, and it became nothing more than a mundane landmark of the area. Honestly, I had completely forgotten about it for a few years now, except for last Tuesday. I was coming home from one of my very late classes at my university, and I usually take the back roads I perused many years ago, as they're more straightforward and scarcely ever have any sort of traffic. As I drove down the gravel path that would wind along the side of the country and eventually take me to the next street that I needed to turn onto, I noticed a faint glinting coming from within the trees up ahead, maybe about 100 meters from my car. Was it a flashlight, I thought? But as my car came closer, I realized what I was really seeing. The light inside of the shack was on. I should mention now that all of the nearly 13 years that I've spent living in my area, I have never seen the door open, and I have never seen a light on inside of that shack, ever. Not even once. I must have driven past that shack probably almost 100 times in my life, but this was the first time I'd ever seen any sign of a person's presence having been anywhere near that thing. That, coupled with the fact that it was 10 o'clock at night, and pitch black outside aside from my headlights, and the faint, incandescent glow light up from the door frame up ahead, immediately filled me with what I can only describe as a weird sense of dread. It would be hard for most people not to immediately be unsettled by something like that, and I am someone who's easily spooked. Fortunately, while my car approached the light, I was curious enough, despite the feeling in my stomach. I slowed down as I was about to pass, hoping that I would see what was going on inside. And this is probably the only reason I managed to spot the dark shape that burst out of the foliage on the side of the road, directly into my path. I wasn't going very fast at that point, but I was still pounding the brakes rather hard in alarm, so my car came to a crunching stop on the gravel. For a moment, I was just really confused and freaked out. What was that? Had I almost hit a deer or something? This is far out in the country. A deer would have been the most likely and most reasonable assumption. But in my beams of the car, I could see what had stopped me. A very tall, very lanky old man with scraggly and balding gray hair. Right away I got that impression that this man was very poor. He looked dirty and unkempt, and his clothes hung off of him. However, I'm generally used to seeing people who aren't that well off in my town, and I don't like to judge people right away based off of the sort of thing. So, I was mostly just extremely unsettled over what the hell this guy was doing way out here, and why he had just walked out in front of my car. As I sat there confused, the old man came around to my window and knocked on the glass. Feeling my memories of stranger danger, conversations with my parents kicking in, as old as those conversations were, I rolled down the window just a crack, only enough for someone to be able to hear me and for me to hear them. I was already creeped out enough as it was. Immediately, I had to say what I was thinking. What are you doing out here?" I asked. In my peripheral vision, I could still see the light from the shack, but in my mind's eye, I wasn't really registering it anymore. Stupid, I know. I should have made the connection immediately, but I was still kind of shaken by the fact that I could have run this guy over if I hadn't been able to stop in time. And being a new driver, and all the thought of that was terrifying. After a small pause, the man started talking to me. He had a thick, croaky sort of voice, and he spoke very slowly.
My truck, it's broken down, he explained.
Oh, okay. I was also getting the feeling that he wasn't really all there, mentally at least. I didn't have to look around to notice there wasn't any truck on the side of the road, but I did anyways. Turning my head around to confirm what I already knew, there was definitely no truck. Had he somehow driven it into the tree or something? As far as I could remember and see, there wasn't enough space anywhere in them for a truck to fit through. What was the man talking about? While I was looking, it was honestly as though I could feel that he was watching me, and when I turned back, he was still leaning down to peer inside of my window at me. Where? I don't see it, I blurted out. I was definitely distrustful of this guy already. At first, he didn't respond, and my nerves were only getting worse the longer we were alone out here. Then he replied,
It's just up the road,
he said, just turning to the point with his finger at this general direction. The lights on my car aren't exactly the greatest, but I could still see far enough that I really couldn't imagine where on earth this truck was supposed to be. I couldn't spot the faintest sight of it. While I squinted up ahead, he continued,
I'll show you where, if you come.
At this point, I really had no idea what this old man was thinking I could do to help. I'm 18 years old, female, and very petite. I don't exactly look like the type of person who knows a lot about cars or how to fix them. And for the record, I'm really not. But as I was tired from a long day at school, so I absolutely was not at my brightest. And for some reason, a part of me felt guilty about leaving him out here alone if the truck was really broken. Okay, I said, and I reached to my gear shift to start driving slowly up the road. But as soon as he saw my hand, he shook his head.
It's up ahead. It's not that far.
What? Excuse me, but no thanks. How the hell was I going to see anything in the dark if I got out of my car and followed him anyway? There is no harm in driving wherever he was trying to lead me. The more I talked to the guy, the more unnerved I was getting, and the more red flags were starting to pop up in my mind. I couldn't see a car anywhere, and this total stranger wanted me to get out of mine and follow him into the dark on this creepy road in the middle of nowhere. I will admit, I am a bit of a naive person, but I am definitely not that stupid. So, no. I'd rather drive to it, I responded. This situation really wasn't making any sense to me. I could see his brow furrow, and he looked kind of agitated. He insisted,
Your car won't fit in there anyways.
So, did his truck crash then? Why the trees? If we were going up the road. I remember what I'd just been thinking a minute earlier about there not being enough space, and I asked him, then how did yours get in the trees? The logical explanation would have been that his truck had swerved off the road. But even if that were the case, there was seriously nothing at all that I could have done to help him fix his car or get it back out again. It genuinely made no sense at all to be asking me to come and help him, and the entire situation was beginning to make me very scared. There was a lengthy enough pause between my question and him speaking up that I was beginning to think he didn't hear me or something, so I asked again. Still no immediate answer. When he finally did reply, he was staring at me directly in the eyes. I think I'm going to have nightmares about it for a long time. It was so sudden, and the way he said it was just so unbelievably creepy.
You don't look old enough to drive.
I hear comments like this a lot, since I do look very young because of my size. Normally someone would say this with a smile, or something to signify that this is in fact meant to be taken as a joke. but the guy's face didn't change even slightly. He just kept staring at me with a completely cold expression. The sheer inappropriateness of such a remark in that kind of situation immediately made my heart race, and all I could think of was, holy crap, what did this guy want with me? What I wanted to say next was, who the hell are you? But instead, I anxiously fumbled for my phone in my pocket, babbling in a way that probably made it really obvious I was completely freaked out of my mind. Okay. I can just call someone to help you out. There's not really anything that I can do. As I said that, it occurred to me to wonder, what did this old guy not have a cell phone of his own? I know every older person has one, even if they're becoming much more common. But seriously. And then, I also remembered, with a sudden streak of massive fear, the shack with the light on. I could still see the light coming from it just up ahead in the trees, and my dumb brain finally put two and two together. The old man hadn't even mentioned it at all. It was like it wasn't even there to him, and there was definitely no one out here that could have turned the light on, but the guy who was standing outside my car right now. What was he doing out here in that shack? Then, which had been locked for all these years by someone I never knew. There was definitely no truck around here. He wanted me out of my car for another reason. I think maybe the old man must have seen my face, that I was scared out of my wits, and about to book it out of there. Instead of any words, without warning, his face contorted with rage, and he swung his fist, pounding it against my window with enough strength to make it shudder. His eyes were wide, and he looked furious and completely freaking insane. Even though I was panicking more than I had ever done in my life, and I was sure he was about to smash the window in if he tried again. I screamed, threw my phone onto the floor, switched gears, and slammed my foot down on the gas pedal. I hurtled down the road, and when I glanced into my rearview mirror, I saw his dark shape turn from standing in the road, and I watched as he turned, and he walked off the road, directly back towards the light of the shack. I didn't slow down at all until I was nearly home, and absolutely sure that there was no one that could have been following me. When I got home that night, I spent a long time crying about what had happened with my mom, and though I don't think she believed all of what I told her, she called up everyone she knew to ask if anyone knew the old man, or if they knew who owned the shack. In a town like ours, just about everyone knows each other, and no one had any clue who he was. One of our family friends even swore that he was sure that it had been abandoned for at least 4 years now. And since most people don't usually take that road, no one said that they've ever seen a light on or the door open but me. I've been taking a different route from home to school ever since, and I really don't think I ever want to head back down that road. Creepy guy in the shack, please, let's not meet again. This was a strange encounter. It was very scary at the time, but when I tell people about this story, they usually don't think it was something to freak out about. Last Thanksgiving, I was driving home from college with a friend. I live in a very isolated part of Arkansas that requires driving through an hour of hairpin turns in the mountains. There are lots of blind turns, and the whole time you're driving on the edge of huge drop-offs with no barriers. I'm usually pretty confident in driving through the mountains, but we were in my friend's car, so I was going slower than usual, driving about 5 over the speed limit. Almost as soon as we started the roughest part of the drive, another car was tailgating us pretty close. This was stressing me out, and as soon as I saw somewhere I could pull over, I did. I pulled into a church parking lot, and my friend offered to drive the rest of the way, but I declined, as it was completely dark, and she had never driven this route before. We get back on our way, and a few minutes later I have to come to a screeching halt as there's a car stopped in the middle of the road. It wasn't on the shoulder at all, just stopped dead in the middle of the road. My friend is saying that they must have broken down, but can't call a tow because there's no service in this area. I immediately have a bad feeling and lock the doors. I tell my friend to stay in the car no matter what. She is starting to get scared at this point and points out that she thinks that is the car that was following us. I can't tell, but I am very scared at this point. It's parked right before a hairpin turn, so I can't pass it. My friend starts frantically telling me to go ahead and pass it, but I don't want to get hit by a Mack truck or fall off the mountainside. I honk my horn, nothing happens. No chance of calling for help as there is no cell service out here. We wait there for a while doing nothing. My friend is crying and freaking out, but I'm too scared to try and pass them. I honk a couple of times, and eventually a guy gets out of the car, comes around back, and leans against his car just staring at us. My friend is freaking out even more, and I'm just frozen. I tell her not to make eye contact. I'm ready to floor it if he does something, but he just stands there and stares. He's not checking his car or anything. I try to stay calm and pray that another car will come along very soon. This goes on for what seems like forever, but probably about 15 or so minutes. He's just casually leaning up against his car looking at us. Eventually we see car lights in our rearview mirror, and then the guy jogs to his door and then gets back into his car. He speeds off, going dangerously fast. So there was nothing wrong with his car. I start driving, not wanting to cause a wreck. We don't see anything else for a while, but we pass the same car parked along the highway a little while later. And it pulls back on and starts tailing us again. I try to speed up and get rid of him, but he keeps following. We have cell service at this point, but I don't know if we should call the cops because nothing really has happened. I call home and tell my brother what's going on, and tell them to wait on the porch for us. The car follows me all the way home down the really long drive to my house. I get to my house, and my two brothers are waiting on the porch holding their deer rifles. I pull in, and the car just goes to the end of the drive, loops around, and speeds off back the way it came. We try to see its plates, but we couldn't make them out. My friend and I were really freaked out, but I told her friends the whole story, and they didn't think it was that big of a deal. This happened about 3 years ago when I was a senior in high school. My now ex-boyfriend and I were in the car. We went to meet another couple at the movies after a basketball game just to kill some time. We were all bored, and none of us wanted to go home. We went to the 10:30 showing of Dear John, which, by the way, I fell asleep in. I didn't care for romantic movies much, and the only good part had to be Channing Tatum. Anyways, the movie ended, and we all piled into our cars. I had to take my boyfriend home because he didn't have his license yet. I hated the back roads, but they were much quicker than going through town, and most likely being stopped at every single red light. He lived out in the middle of absolutely nowhere. We're about 5 minutes away from his house when my headlights reveal a young woman standing in the road frantically waving her arms, flagging me down. It's about midnight at this point, and I'm wondering if maybe, possibly her car broke down. I felt nothing wrong with this situation, so I pulled over to the side of the road. I might want to mention in advance that I am so freaking stupid for doing this. She rushes up to the car and asks if we can give her a lift. She tells us that her boyfriend and her got into a fight, and he forced her out of his car, and she was walking home. She still had about 10 miles to go. I felt bad for her, but I still was suspicious. I told her she could use my cell phone if she needed to, and then made up an excuse that I didn't have enough gas to get her where she wanted to go. She said she would give me money, and then out of nowhere she starts looking at me and smiling. She kept repeating things like, "Oh my God, I know you. I remember. Don't you remember me?" I have never before seen this woman in my whole life. She kept saying things like, "How could you refuse a ride to someone you know? I'm not a stranger." I only had my window cracked about 3 inches at this point, and when I kept refusing her a ride, she got angry and cursed at me, calling me all kinds of names. She reached in the car and tried hitting me when I rolled up the window and caught her fingers in the window between the frame and the glass. She screamed. I unrolled it enough so that she could remove her fingers and quickly locked my door before she tried that. Out of nowhere, a man comes out from the wooded area next to the road. This guy was huge. He looked like a security guard that you would see with like Beyonce or something protecting her from the paparazzi. I was frozen. My boyfriend slowly took his cell phone from his pocket and dialed 911. He hit my hood and demanded that I get out of the car, or he was going to pull a gun on me. I snapped back into reality and put my car in reverse. I swerved around the man and the woman as tears were pouring out of my eyes. The adrenaline had finally gotten to me, and I realized that we had just gotten out of something that could have been a very awful ending for us. We reached my boyfriend's house and waited for the police. They took our information, and we told them what had happened. They made their way back to the spot and found burlap sacks, a gun, a knife, a rope, and a camera. They also found tire marks where a car had been parked in the wooded area. What did they want with us? Most likely, I will never find out. This has to be the scariest thing that has ever happened to me, but I am so happy that I got out safe and alive. I was walking home at 1 a.m. on a Sunday morning. It was a transition between autumn and winter. Cold, but no snow or rain. Just cold and overcast. This night it had gotten cold to the point where it was foggy as well. All was silent, and for whatever reason, there wasn't any cars around. The street lights were very dim as well. I had 2 paths to get me home. The route with street lights that feels a bit safer, but it was really long, or the back road that doesn't have any lights, but it only takes about 5 minutes walking versus 15 to 20. Me being my lazy self, I decided on the latter of the two, the unlit route. About halfway through, I hear footsteps behind me, a fair distance away, but loud enough to hear nonetheless. I decide to look back, but see nobody behind me due to the fog. I decided to wait, and saw a dark silhouette of a woman walking. She seemed young from what I could see. I'd say she was about mid-20s. I thought nothing of her, and turned back and moved on. Suddenly I hear her footsteps speed up. Becoming slightly paranoid, I increase my walking speed a bit. She continues to walk even faster. I look back and she breaks into a full-blown sprint towards me. I could see an intersection ahead and was about 200 feet from the road, which I crossed to get to the condo that I live in. Adrenaline kicks in and I sprint all the way to the intersection without even looking back. Once I got to the intersection, I stopped and out of breath. I looked back to see nothing but fog. The woman had disappeared. All of a sudden, from within the fog, I hear a loud cackling laugh, similar to the one you'd hear from a witch in a movie. And she just continues to laugh and laugh, not stopping. I get spooked and J-sprint across the road and quickly run into my home. Lock all of the doors and windows and look out of my living room window. There was nothing but fog. I continued to sit there for a few minutes until I see the woman again, slowly walking out of the fog. She couldn't see me since I was looking in from between the blinds, and it was dark. She stands in the middle of the street she was on, no cars around, and looks around to her left and her right. It seemed like she was looking for me. All of a sudden, something that I didn't expect to happen at all happened. She broke down into tears. She fell to her knees and started to sob, as if she were extremely hurt or disappointed that she couldn't find me. She sat there on her knees and sobbed. constantly for 5 minutes. Afterwards, she calmed down. She just got up and left, still quietly whimpering as she walked down the street away. 3 weeks later, the same situation occurs. I'm walking along the same road, same weather, fog and all. The exact same thing as the last encounter with the woman happens again, except this time I stopped across the street, turned, and looked back towards the fog. Soon enough, she walked out and stared at me from across the road. After about 2 minutes of us just looking at each other, she just turns around and walks back into the fog. I turn away and quickly go home. I look out the window again to see if she's there anymore, but she wasn't. I heard the same horrible sobbing a few seconds after, though, from within the fog. It spooked me because the crying wasn't just a bit of emotional hurt. It sounded as if she were crying over something majorly painful in her life both times. Like a murdered husband, or if her house had burned to the ground. It sounded as if her life were ruined both times. It's been almost a year since both these occurred, and I haven't walked down the same road in the dark again for fear of seeing her. But the question still sits in the back of my head. Who was she, and why was she doing this? What was she crying over?
If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, like, and hit the bell for notifications on future videos, and become a stalker of the night. And I'll see you next time.